As soon as people start having children, a big question on their minds is, how many children should we have? Or should we have another child? Kind of daunting move is from 2 to 3 children. So a lot of people really wonder once they hit 2 kids, like, should we have a third? And what would it be like to have a third? I don't know if we should have a third. How hard is it? Many people do say that having 3 children is the hardest number, and that is not just moving to 3 is hardest, but that 3 is harder than 7. So 3 can be a difficult number. That is pretty universally noted among a lot of parents, but that should not deter you from having a third child if you are feeling like that is the right decision for you. In this video, we are going to talk about how hard is it really to add that third child, and talk about common questions like, how can mom possibly take a nap? And does mom have time for herself? We'll also talk about the unique challenges that accompany adding a third child, and then tips to make it as easy as possible. But first, hello, my name is Valerie. I blog at babywisemom.com. I am the mother to 4 children who currently range in age from 11 to 18 years old. And I love helping parents love parenting. The first question is, how hard is it really? Like so many things in life, so many answers to parenting questions is it depends on a few things. One is it depends on your other kids. When my third child, McKenna, was born, I had 2 older children, obviously, who were ages 4 and 2 years old, or they were almost 4 and almost 2 years old. And honestly, they really played together really well. So it wasn't that hard to bring in a new baby because those 2 loved to play. They had a grand time together. And so they really were happy and content to spend their time with each other and weren't so needy on me. They weren't so upset that I was distracted with a baby. And so that made it pretty easy in that way. That was especially nice when McKenna would have like a growth spurt, or when she would have a short nap. So things can be pretty simple when you have a good schedule set up, but when you have that disruption, that's kind of when having a newborn plus any number of older children can be difficult, because those other children have needs. It's not like when you just have one baby and it's like just disrupting you when they wake up early or are off schedule, but when you're trying to juggle these different schedules. Having those 2 children who were happy and content to just play with each other made it really easy when McKenna brought a disruption in through just normal stuff that happens with babies like growth spurts. The difficulty can also really depend on the baby. How hard or easy is the baby? And for me, with my third child, my third baby was my easiest baby to that point. My oldest had been my hardest. He was not a great sleeper as a baby, and that can make a baby really hard. The second child, Caitlin, was a pretty easy baby, but she also had reflux, and reflux just makes things harder. Even a really easy baby who has reflux will be harder than an easy baby who doesn't have reflux. So McKenna was this super easy baby who loved to sleep and just naturally was a great sleeper. And so it really made it a really easy transition into 3 children with a newborn. It also can depend on your lifestyle. How busy are you in your life? For me, with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, we were kind of pretty much just home anyway, and we were okay with being home. It wasn't like we were running everywhere and then disrupting that newborn sleep and disrupting the ability to establish a solid routine for that new baby. And so that wasn't too bad. We didn't have all these disruptions we were juggling. Once McKenna turned 2 years old, that's where things got a lot harder for me with 3 children. And it's because the older kids had gotten older and were more involved. And also the third child was awake a lot. And she still took 1 nap, but she was awake for the rest of the day. And she was actually kind of a difficult toddler. She was what we call strong-willed. And so she was kind of a hard toddler. My oldest child was in kindergarten at that point, and he had some activities at that point. He was taking piano lessons, and he was doing some rec sports, like he did soccer. He suddenly had school drop off, school pickup, piano lessons once a week, soccer practice, a couple of games a week. And those things would disrupt and just made life harder in general. But those kind of things are harder the more children that you have. And then at the time, the middle child at the time was 4 years old, and she had started dance class and she had a play group, and so she had a couple of things going on too. So it just got trickier. We were balancing a few different things, balancing 3 different children's schedules amongst our own lives, like what we had as adults going on. And that just gets harder, and you get better at it. Anytime you add, it's like adding weight. When you're lifting weights, you're adding difficulty, you do get better at it. You get more adept, you're able to manage it, you learn how to juggle. There does come a point where it is more challenging. But if you have older children who are involved in other things already, when you have that newborn, that will make the newborn more difficult. A very common question that I had when I first had 3 children was, how do you get time to sleep as the mom? How do you have time to nap? Like, when you've just delivered a baby, you're exhausted and your body needs to heal. And so napping can be a big, important part of that. Honestly, that was a big challenge. Being able to nap with 3 children was very hard. It was a lot easier with 2 children. It was a lot easier with my second baby than with my third. And I really did not get a lot of naps with that newborn. You know, I had a 4-year-old who didn't take naps anymore. And my 2-year-old did take naps. So, you know, I could try, if the 2-year-old and newborn naps lined up, I could try to take a nap, but then I still had a 4-year-old who was not asleep. And you can do rest time, which is great in that. So you could, in theory, have a child in rest time, a child napping, and a newborn taking a nap also, and be able to take a nap yourself. You know, you have like a lot of emotions going on when you have a newborn too, just those emotions are going crazy. And I definitely felt paranoid personally with leaving a 4-year-old awake while I tried to nap. I just couldn't do it. Definitely there are things you could do to make yourself more comfortable with that, like having a video monitor in that room, or at least an audio monitor so you can hear what's going on. And so then of course you're not going to go into deep of a sleep. But if you have a monitor on each child, my emotions and my paranoia did not allow me to really sleep while I had older children who could potentially get up while I was sleeping and move about independently. You know, I'm not worried about them needing me, because then they can cry and that can wake me up. But if they get up and just start wandering and get into something and something happens and I'm asleep, that was a concern for me. Which probably doesn't help you feel less paranoid yourself, but that was just the reality. That's just the honesty. That's the reality of the situation, that I did not sleep. Another really common question that I got was, do you ever have time for yourself? You definitely have less time for yourself. Once again, like, just pure honesty, like, it logically makes sense that every child that you have is going to require more of your time. That should be what happens. Like, they should need your time. Like, they are children, they are youth. I mean, even like my teenagers now, they need my time. Like, your spouse needs your time. Any relationship you have in your life is going to take some of your time. So it is definitely harder to find time to yourself when you have 3 children than it was when you had 2 children. For sure, that is more difficult. There are things you can do to make it easier, like if you have independent playtime. If your 2 older children have time every day where they play independently, and you set that up so that happens at the same time, or at least overlapping part of a newborn nap, then you can have some time to yourself, or whatever kind of self-care thing you want to do during that time. And there are other things you can do with your schedule to help with that. Like I talked earlier about rest time and nap time for older kids. So if rest time, nap time, and baby naps line up, maybe you don't feel comfortable like taking a nap, but maybe you feel comfortable reading a book or doing a face mask or doing whatever it is that for you is self-care that just helps you have some time for you. There are some unique challenges when you have 3 children versus 2 children. The really big one, I think, is your brain suddenly has to be able to track 3 different people instead of just 2 different people. For me personally, that was something I had to learn. That was a skill I had to develop. I could very easily split my brain in half and track child 1, child 2, no problem. But tracking 3 ways was a lot more difficult for me. And there are things you can do to help that, like write things down. Don't just try to track it in your head. For sure, keep notes, keep a log, know what's going on with having it written out. Don't just depend on your memory. And just tracking 3 unique schedules, 3 unique activities is just harder. And that's not unique to adding a child. Every child you add, that becomes more difficult. But I didn't feel like it was as difficult for me to track 4 children as it was for me to learn to track 3. So I think the learning to track 3 just enabled me to develop the skills to be able to track 4. And that could just be unique to me. Maybe for you, 3 will be really no bigger of a deal than it was to track 2. Maybe it was kind of difficult for you to learn to track 2. And so you developed the skill for enhancing your ability already, just like I did with 3, so that 4 wasn't a big deal for me. Maybe you enhanced that at 2 so that 3 would be no big deal for you. Those are just a couple of challenges that for me were more unique with 3 than it was with any other number that I have. So a question we often ask each other as mothers is like, would you do it again? Would you have a 3rd child again? And I think, I've never heard anyone say anything other than yes, which of course you're going to say, because if you say no, then you're subtracting that child from your life, which you are not going to do. That should give you comfort. Like the answer is always yes. And that should give you comfort. Like if you have that 3rd child, like you could have moments of like, what were we thinking? But for like overall, your answer would be like, yes, that was worth it. Yes, I'm glad we did it. Yes, I would do it again. Knowing everything we know now, I would absolutely, of course, do it again. So that should give you some comfort in like the decision to have another child is a good one. And of course, good does not mean easy. Not the same thing. So let's talk about some tips for how to make it easier for you to add a 3rd child. One is to have a routine in place for your other 2 children before that 3rd child arrives. Like make sure your older children have a bedtime. Make sure your older children have a consistent time they wake up in the day. Make sure your older children have naps if that's age appropriate. If it's not age appropriate, make sure they're having rest time every day. You don't want to introduce rest time after a new baby is born and make it seem like, oh, now you have to have rest time because there's a new baby here. That's just already part of their day. They already have rest time. They already have like consistent times of day that they eat meals. It's so much easier for you if their day is predictable, routine, so that you can stick to that. Just make sure they're solid. And of course, as solid as they are, you do need to add a 3rd child into that mix. I highly recommend that you make a game plan for, a rough tentative, this is what baby's schedule will be when baby comes. I recommend making more than one potential schedule, because you may have a baby who naturally is an early morning riser. You may have a baby who's more willing to sleep in. And so it's good to have like okay, here's our schedule, ideal schedule if this baby is like a 7 a.m. waker. Here's our ideal schedule if baby is more of an 8 a.m. waker, or whatever fits into that. Just so you have some different ideas of like, here's how we'd handle that, here's how we'd handle that. Get that schedule going. And then have it in place before the baby's born. Like be at it at least 2 weeks before your baby comes, which of course you probably don't know exactly when your baby's going to arrive, but you have an idea of when your due date is. And you also have an idea of what you tend to do, although that obviously can change from pregnancy to pregnancy, but are you typically have your baby early, typically on time? Like, let's say the baby could come up to 3 weeks early. So have that schedule in place 5 weeks before your due date, and you're working on it so that when the baby comes, the baby just enters that schedule and you're not asking your older children to change up their day as well as add a whole entire human into the family dynamic. That really helps make the transition smoother and helps avoid resentment from older children toward the baby. Another good thing to do to help with that is to let your older children help prepare for the baby. Let them help you pick out things to buy for the baby. Let them help you get the nursery ready. Just let them help you with that prep work and just that can help build excitement and get them ready and anxious for the baby to come. Once the baby's there, let them help take care of the baby, but be careful that you don't put the older sibling into an I'm in charge of you situation. You don't want the older siblings to think that they are in charge of the baby. They're siblings with the baby. Frame it as serving. Like if you are changing the baby's diaper, you can say, oh, can you please go get a diaper for me? Or can you please go get a diaper for the baby? And when they do, say, oh, thank you. That is such nice service. Thank you so much for serving me. Thank you so much for serving the baby. Like, that is so kind of you. They're serving, they're helping. When you serve, you love who you serve. That's just fact. So if your older children are serving the baby, then they will grow to love the baby. If you're like putting the child in charge of the baby, like, then that's not really necessarily going to build love. And you don't want to build future conflict of bossiness and that kind of thing. So frame it as service. Another tip is to make sure you have some one-on-one time with each of your older children each day, which is hard. This is taking up a lot of your time. Newborns take a lot of your time. You have a whole nother human to take care of in your house. It is hard. Like, that's an acknowledgement. It's not easy, but there are simple things you can do to spend one-on-one time with older children, and some of them you may just already do. So it's not really, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're just making sure we intentionally keep these things in our day. Example of that can be reading a book. So you might read a book one-on-one with each child each day. Or maybe you have one child help you make dinner each day. And so then there is time with you and that child that you have to eat. Or maybe you help them make lunch and prepare lunch. Like, bring them in to help you with something so it is you and that child one-on-one together. You can sometimes even go a little bigger. Like, maybe you were able to take a walk with just one child or go run errands with just one child. So find ways to still have that one-on-one time. Even with your preparations, it's good to be prepared for stressed kids. It changes your life a lot. It changes your life as the mother a lot. It changes your child's life a lot. And so it's very normal for them to potentially be stressed. Not all kids will be, but some could be a little bit stressed. And even your oldest, who's already welcomed a child, they might not really remember adding a second child to the family. You know, for Braden, he was not even 2 years old when Caitlin was born. So when McKenna came, it's not like he's like, oh yeah, I remember this. Like, it was a whole new experience really for him. And a good practice to help prevent some sibling rivalry is to not blame the baby when you can't do something. You know, don't say, oh, you know what, I'd love to read you a book, but I just can't. I'm too tired. I was up with the baby all night and now I'm too tired. Just instead, like, you can still be honest, like, you are too tired. Like, I can't do that right now. I'm too tired because I didn't sleep well last night. You don't need to say it's because of the baby. Something that's really helpful and really, really tender is if you are able, when you come home with the baby, have a couple of days at least where the two older children are staying with grandma or an aunt or someone else you trust, so that you and your spouse can spend time getting to know that baby. You have to know a baby to help troubleshoot and know their needs and their unique disposition and like sleep needs and feeding needs and all of that. And so if your older children are gone, it's just easier for you to focus in, and that can go a long way for helping you with troubleshooting and fixing schedules down the road. And that's not always possible for everyone, but if it is possible and you're able to do it, I highly recommend it. Another tip is to nap if you can. We talked about napping already, but if you can, it's hard because there's so much for you that you need to do. And so it can be hard to say, yes, I'm going to take this time that I have to nap. If you have the time, it is wise to take it, especially while you are in that healing process. When you're planning your daily routine, plan it out so that you have the time and ability to focus one-on-one with the newborn. You structure your day so that you can do that for at least 4 weeks, ideally 8 weeks, so that when your newborn is awake, you're able to focus on that newborn. And the way you do that is you have independent playtime for your older 2 children. And so let's say you get your baby up and you're feeding, but right before it's time for that baby to eat, the 2 older kids go into independent playtime. So you don't have to worry about them. You don't have them interrupting or disrupting. You're able just to focus on the baby. You can also do that with nap time and with rest time. You can have the 2 older children have sibling playtime, which I talk about on my blog. Having sibling playtime where it is a time of day where those 2 children are scheduled to play with each other. Now, of course, they're going to play with each other a lot anyway, but it's like, this is special sibling playtime, and this is where you play. This is a structured play time in the day. And a structured play is mom decides where they play and when they play. And so, okay, you're going to play in Braden's room. And so they go together into Braden's room and they're playing while I am taking care of McKenna. And we had structured sibling playtime in place before McKenna came along. That happened every day before she was there. So that was just, yeah, of course, now we're going to sibling playtime. Hooray! Like, they loved it. A huge benefit of doing this is you are able to focus on the baby, and you're able to make sure that baby gets the appropriate wake time length and isn't awake too long. Make sure that baby's getting a full feeding. Helps you get to know the baby better. And that helps that baby be able to sleep well, and it disrupts the rest of the day less. And so it just really is a benefit for the whole family. And along that same line, you want to make sure that the baby isn't overstimulated. It's really easy for a second, third, fourth, etc. baby to become overstimulated by older siblings. And so having those older siblings occupied during baby's feeding and awake time can help prevent the overstimulation from happening. And that's something to be very aware of, is that the more stimulation a baby gets, usually the less wake time they can handle. And so maybe your first child could handle a newborn like 45 minutes of awake time, and then you're confused why your third cannot. But if that third child is around those older siblings a lot with all of the noise and energy that they bring, then that third child probably cannot stay awake 45 minutes. It is okay for the newborn to have time, like wake times where they don't see the siblings. Like if the siblings are in sibling playtime and you get the baby up, feed the baby, put the baby back down to bed before getting the older siblings out of sibling playtime, that's okay. That's not a problem. They will see the baby during the day. They don't have to see the baby every single time the baby's awake. That will come when the baby gets older and it can have longer wake times and can play more. They will have more time with the baby. It will be totally fine. Another tip is to keep your life simple. Cut things out that you can. Cut back on your commitments and the things that you have to do. Just keep it simple for a while you're adjusting and learning these new skills that you need for having 3 kids. If you have commitments that you're trying to get back to, just be patient with yourself and don't dive in too soon. You can't unring the bell. As soon as you retake over responsibilities, it's really hard to be like, never mind, I am not ready for that, and give it back. People will be patient with you, like not taking those back on. They'll be less patient if you take responsibilities on and then try to hand them back. So it's better to wait until you are sure you can handle it. So that might be in a work career, that might be in something you volunteer with, just whatever you have going on in your life. Just don't jump back in too soon. Give yourself some grace and some time before you jump back in. Another great tip for those first couple of weeks is to have another adult in the house if you can. And that can be like maybe that's great for you, maybe it's not, because adding another adult probably will disrupt the older 2 kids' daily routine. And so I would say bring in another adult, whether that be a mother, mother-in-law, spouse, sister, neighbor, whatever. Bring that person in if you're confident that they will stick with your routine. Because it is good for those older kids to be able to have that consistent routine while adding baby into the family, so that it's like life isn't too disrupted. It's like, okay, we've added this baby, but I still have independent play every day. I'm still having my sibling play. I still have my rest time every day. Like, life's a little different, but it's also a lot the same. It's great to have that person there to help you out while you are healing and while you are getting to know your baby. And maybe you say, you know what, I'd rather have that person there and have my other kids have a totally wacky routine the first couple of weeks. And that's fine. Like, they probably, they'll take some time to adjust back to the routine. You got to decide what you think is ultimately best for you. And that can be especially true, like the need for just, I don't care if it disrupts the older kids, if you had a cesarean, because it can be harder to recover from that. Or if you had a more traumatic delivery and you just have more to heal from. So, you might have needs that are like, yes, that's going to disrupt a lot, but I really need that person there. And the final tip is to have first time obedience in place. Make sure your older kids are used to listening to you. They're used to obeying your voice. You want that in place before the baby comes. And that can be really hard at the end of a pregnancy because you're totally exhausted. And that's normal. That's normal for you to have let things kind of slide. And then once the baby comes, you're like, okay, I'm back to me and we're back to, we listen to mom. But just do your best to keep that in place so that when you're nursing a baby or you're holding a baby, you really need those older kids to just listen to you, because it's very difficult to take care of older kids while you're taking care of a newborn. But with that said, if you give your child an instruction and they don't listen, and kids are really smart, they're going to notice very quickly that when you're feeding a baby that you're not as responsive. If they start getting into something and you tell them, oh, don't get into that, and they just ignore you, and you do nothing, they're going to notice, like, when mom's feeding that baby, I can get away with things. So, do not be afraid to set down if you're feeding your baby and your child's not listening, to set down your newborn and go take care of your child. Nope, you can't touch that. You can't be holding that. Don't get into that. And that's part of why I say to make sure the newborn is, the other kids are occupied while you're taking care of your newborn, so that you can more easily just focus on the newborn or just focus on the other kids. But that's not always possible. So if they are up while you're taking care of the newborn, do not be afraid to stop feeding the newborn and just keep it established. No, the requirement is that you listen to mom. Okay, that wraps up the transitioning from 2 to 3 children. If you have your own tips, feel free to drop them in the comments. If you have questions, drop those in the comments and I will answer. And thanks for watching and have a great day.